Whitman Gender Equity Prize was initiated in 2017. It's a prestigious National Institute of Architects prize awarded to a person who's demonstrated exceptional leadership and made an outstanding contribution to the advancement of gender equity in architectural practice, education, and governance. When Paula Whitman published Going Places, the career progression of women in the architecture profession in 2005, the profession was very different, where Paula described the position of women architects as handmaidens to the profession. Her observations led her to research gender equity, and this publication was born. It was the foundation of lasting change to our profession. Showing leadership in gender equity takes innovative and strategic thinking, compassion, authenticity, high moral principles, and exceptional intelligence. It means walking the walk and talking the talk with dignity and commitment always. To show the ongoing commitment throughout your whole career is something that our winner has demonstrated. Her practices and her deep knowledge about architecture, the buildings, and the people have resulted in lasting change. And so I'm delighted to announce that the 2022 Paula Whitman Prize for Leadership in Gender Equity is awarded to Fiona Gardner. Congratulations, Fiona.
Fiona Gardner is a preeminent and respected role model for women who has consistently demonstrated relevant, sustained and active leadership. Graduating in 1978 with only 2 other women, she completed a master's degree in conservation at York University, returning to Queensland at a time when the state's historic buildings were under threat from the Bjelke-Petersen government. She navigated a challenging public service working environment with professionalism and grace, advocated for other women, and worked to develop and implement non-discriminatory policies. Later, as Chief Executive Officer and Director of Heritage at the Department of Environment and Science, she helped to develop heritage protection policies over many decades. In 1983, she was inaugural President of Women in Architecture, working to raise the profile of women architects through exhibitions, events, and radio interviews. These early years of promoting women architects provided the foundations of an attitude that has been fostered throughout her career and passed on to all around her. Congratulations, Fiona Gardner.
Thank you, Catherine. This award is particularly special to me, as I have a personal connection with Paula Whitman. Early in my career, I worked for the same architectural practice as Paula, and I came to know her and admire her vitality and enthusiasm for architecture. Over the years, I was able to watch her develop as a trailblazer in the profession for women. I would like to thank Dr. Michael Lavery and Professor Susan Savage, who secretly nominated me, and it was a huge surprise when I got the call to advise me of the award. I would also like to thank the 20 referees that supported the nomination, and in particular Alice Hampson, Judith Mackay and Don Watson, who I am told surreptitiously provided information. I would especially like to acknowledge my friends, the amazing group of women architects that formed in Brisbane in the 1980s. They have been my support, role models and inspiration. They have all made and continue to make substantial contributions to the architectural profession and to a more equal society. They have run their own practices, been directors in national firms, become leading academics, worked in the public sector, and championed causes to do with women, children, the environment, planning and heritage. They have all actively mentored and supported younger women architects. I am in the fortunate position of being able to reflect, and over my working life, I have experienced and benefited from much change. I have seen an increasing number of women entering the architectural profession. I have seen the introduction of legislation which prohibits discrimination based on sex. I have experienced changes to employment conditions which are making the workplace more inclusive and flexible for everyone. I look forward to the day when the Institute of Architects won't need a Gender Equity Award, but we're not there yet. Unfortunately, the statistics don't lie. They tell the story of women dropping out of the profession mid-career, not registering, not becoming members of the Institute, and not reaching senior leadership positions in architectural firms. I hope in my lifetime to see a different set of statistics that reflect true gender equity. I thank all the people who have supported me throughout my career, the Australian Institute of Architects, and the jury who have honoured me with this award. Thank you.
Fiona, congratulations. That is so wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for being part of this panel. And that is just indicative of your generosity and your willingness to be part of the conversation always, and such a leader. On behalf of the Institute of Architects and the Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Committee, congratulations. Would you like to say a few words, Fiona? You're on mute. We can't have a webinar without someone having to say you're on mute.
Thank you, Katerina, and happy International Women's Day to everybody. Yes, I will say a few things, but I too want to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional custodians on the land on which we are having this event today, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. It's a great honour for me to be acknowledged by receiving the Paula Whitman Gender Equity Prize. And as I said in the video, it's particularly special because I knew Paula. We worked together at Conrad and Gardner when I was a recent graduate and Paula was still a student. And she was such a vital person who just gave so much to so many people. And here in Queensland, she will have touched a lot of people, and I imagine many listening today, either as a fellow student, work colleague, or an inspirational teacher at QUT. As Catherine outlined, Paula's 2005 study, Going Places, the career progression of women in the architectural profession, connected the lack of workplace policies and flexible working arrangements as the key obstacle for women contributing to the architectural practice. This study grew out of Paula's realisation in 2002 that though nearly half of all architectural students and graduates in Australia were women, only 16% of registered architects across the country were female. Her work was foundational and it continues to inspire others today and is the basis of very serious ongoing research projects. In 2004, Paula became the Queensland President of the AIA, the first and only woman to hold this position. So that's a challenge for us. I see my acknowledgement of this prize as being an acknowledgement for my generation of women architects who tried to break down the bias. And I'm going to name some of them, and apologies to those who I forget, I've left out. But this group was very active in the 1980s and have continued to advocate for women in architecture through their whole careers. And they've made huge contributions, and you'll know many of them. So I'd like to acknowledge Catherine Baudet, Ruth Woods, Penny Campbell, Britt Anderson, Patrice Derrington, Susan Savage, Elizabeth Watson-Brown, Gail Plunkett and Karen Dempsey. I'd also like to remember Helen Josephson, who was, like Paula Whitman, unfortunately passed away at too early an age, and who was very active in the 1980s and responsible for the exhibition that we held. I was recently listening to an interview with the well-known feminist Wendy McCarthy, and she recalls that the motto for her and her friends was, "Just keep going." This resonates for me, and if we're going to break down the bias, we must just keep going. Thank you, Katerina.
Thank you, Fiona. This is, yes, thank you. Sorry, I was getting so caught up in listening to you speak, I forgot that we have to move on. So today's webinar is a discussion about the 2022 theme for International Women's Day, Breaking the Bias. And the intention was to tease out a few common themes that have emerged from our discussions, examining types of bias and even looking at biases that we ourselves are guilty of, and what we can do about it. So I'll introduce the panel. Fiona Gardner, you may have heard of. She's the Director of Heritage at the Department of Environment and Resource Management, and this year's Paula Whitman Prize winner, which none of us knew, by the way. We have Leah Lang, who's the Queensland Government Architect. Hi, Leah. Cameron Taylor is an Associate at Conrad Gargett. Georgia Burks is an Associate Editor at Architecture Media. Selena Mayer, Interior Design Assistant at Biggin & Masters and QT's 2021 SONA representative. We did have Belinda Allwood, Director of POD, joining us today, but she's had a last-minute emergency that, so she is terribly disappointed and sends her apologies, but she is ably represented by Shanine Fanton, also a director at POD, and hi, Shanine. I'll give you a brief outline of today's proceedings. We're going to conduct a Mentimeter poll. So all over this. And there it is. A QR code has appeared that you can scan. We're going to ask our panelists a number of questions today. And the first question is, what does bias mean to you? So in the audience, if you can scan the code, write some responses. At the end of the first part, we will display a word cloud that arises your responses, and then we'll go on to the next one. So to start, what does bias mean to you? First, I'd like to invite Cameron to talk to us a little bit about the types of bias and how do we learn these biases.
Thank you, Katerina. So yeah, one thing that interests me with bias is that there's a number of areas it can come from. A lot of the time it can be multi-layered, and also that we are all inevitably have had instances where we ourselves have been biased, and just making sure we check ourselves just as much as we pull up others when they do it. So gender, of course, is multifaceted. There's just a straight up sex and sexual orientation that we can be judged by. Even goes to relationship status, the idea of women as mother, but there's also women that aren't mothers, and acknowledging that there are differences and we're not all sort of stereotyped to one type. There's also age and experience, religion, lack thereof for some of us. I've actually seen that come up a couple of times. The background as well, so whether that's ethnicity or genealogical background, but also even some sort of schoolyard antics of background sort of attacks on where did you go to school, and that as a means to cast judgments against people. There's also then just physical appearance and stereotypes. So a number of these have actually been learnt biases. I'm sure even when I was a kid growing up, you always had the idea of the doctor was the man and that sort of thing, because these were the images that we were given for a long time. It's greatly starting to change now, but there's still a fair way to go, and actually representing women as architects to younger generations really needs to keep moving forward on that front. Some biases can come out of people's ignorance, not really understanding and casting judgments before necessarily learning about it. But the real ones that can be problematic is when biases have become weaponized. So they either become sort of a defense mechanism for some people that might have some insecurities or feeling threatened by you as professionally, and those who actually use it as an act of dominance. So whenever I come across a bias, whether it's myself being biased occasionally, which I try not to, or hearing stories of other people, I try and also look at where is it coming from to get an understanding of, is this a deliberate act, or is this an area where we need to sort of extend the learning, that sort of thing.
That's fantastic. I like the thought about the weaponization of bias. We've spoken about in some of the early discussions, we talked about weaponization of bias, weaponization of gender, which is an interesting topic in itself. Shanine, I was hoping you might be able to elaborate a little bit on socially encultured biases and behaviours that you've experienced, or we probably all have, and if you could flesh that out a little bit.
No worries, Katarina. Well, thanks for having me today, everyone, at the last minute. I'm going to speak from, I guess, my own personal background, which is a kind of mixed European one, and of largely being raised in an Italian farming household in far north Queensland. And if you think about bias, reciprocity in my family, it means a lot. And so there's a kind of unconscious set of activities that go on around when you do things for other people. And it is a little bit non-gender specific in this instant, but there are responsibilities around reciprocity. So if someone does something for you, then you have to do that thing in return. And as I've gotten older, I've come to understand that it's completely a socially and culturally enculturated activity that's related to where I've come from as a person, and that there are other peoples and cultures in the world who understand reciprocity in a similar way or in an aligned way. But then there are other people that I meet and work with and have come across who have no understanding about reciprocity. That's just kind of one example. And in fact, this morning when I came in and I was very busy in the office, Ellen, who works with us, whose partner is also from an Italian background, she came to me and she said, if I make you a cup of coffee, will you do this for me? And I immediately said, excellent, of course I will do that for you, and I'm glad we understand each other so well. So that what I know this is not making serious this important fact, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that everyone comes from, bias is completely, from my perspective, an enculturation, a social enculturation. It is not about what you're born, it's not innate in you, it is created in you as a child, and we all have it. And it's really important for you to understand what you have. And I think it becomes absolutely pronounced when you take yourself and then you're working in different environments. So when I'm working with builders on site, their social enculturation is quite different to mine. And if I'm working with First Nations people on country, social enculturation is different to mine, but there are some overlaps that we can share. And so there is this incredible dance of sort of tolerance and patience, but frustration at the same time, and sometimes confusion. And then when it works is when there's a willingness for patience and kind of straight talking, where you can say, I don't understand. This is the circumstance I'm in. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Can you work with me so that we can understand each other? Doesn't always work with builders, of course, but we have to try. I guess that's my kind of small commentary on, and when I thought about what bias means to me, it really means confusion and frustration initially, you know, offence potentially. And then later on, when you process, it means perspective. And that really, as you said, you've got to put your feet in someone else's shoes to be able to understand where it's coming from. Doesn't mean you have to tolerate it, but at least it will help you unpack it.
Thanks, Janine. I think there's a lot that's come out of just even this discussion is about recognition, the recognition of bias. Once you are aware that you're doing it or someone else is biased, then you're not reacting to their reaction, you're reacting to their why, like what assumption it is that they're making, and also having the courage to say, I don't understand. I don't know. I don't understand. Can you explain it to me? And so the more these conversations that we have are, I think, very helpful and encouraging people to continue to have discussions. So the discussions that we're having about bias now, nice segue, see what I did there. I wanted to cross to Fiona again, because you started the inaugural Women in Architecture group in 1982. It is 2022. Are we still having the same conversations? Has it evolved? How has it evolved?
Yes and no. And you know, this being on this panel has given me a sort of opportunity to think back and actually look at some of the records from the 1880s. I mean, 1980s. We're not that old. And you know, the things that we were trying to do was, you know, the promotion of women architects, combating discrimination, providing support for women, and things like for women who are temporarily out of the workforce, and continuing education and networking, and some of the things. And it's sort of mind-boggling when I look back, and I was reading in the minutes that we were complaining because job ads were in the men and boys section of the newspapers, and that there were no women on the board of architects, and there were no women examiners on the board of architects, and we were lobbying for those things. So in some ways there's been kind of lots of structural change, and so some of those things that we were very concerned about you know, have improved. Like there's more women on the board of architects than men now, and you know, there's women examiners, and there's women lecturers at university, and 50% of, you know, students are women. And when I went to the president's dinner last week, and you see who wins the prizes, it's always the women. So they're obviously the best students. But so a lot of things have changed, and much for the better, and it's exciting to see it. But then I still think we're having a lot of the same conversations about, and it's to do with you know, the gender pay gap. Women are paid less, and you know, and as I said in the video, that when you look at how many women drop out mid-career and don't achieve you know, leadership positions in large firms in the way that their male colleagues do and everything, we're still a lot of bias there, and yeah, we've got a way to go, I'd say, Katrina, still. But panels like this are fantastic, and I'm always so uplifted when I get to meet younger women architects, and how articulate and clever, and the things they're doing. It's just a real joy. So I think of last year when we we could all get together in one room, and that was just, you know, 200 women, and it was just fantastic. So there's a lot to sort of celebrate and be very proud of, I think.
Thank you. And thanks for paving the way, and the being such a pioneer, and having an actual real example. People that you and the women that you named earlier, they're all women that we know through the industry, and and they've
all been fantastic, and they all mentor people and do wonderful things. So I did, you know, it's not just about me.
No, I appreciate that. It is about you. You can have a moment in the sunshine for a little while, and your generosity, all of you, that's incredible. So next I'd like to go to Selena, who's early in her career, and I thought that's a nice sort of segue from Fiona. And so Selena, what does bias mean to you? What have you encountered? What do you seek? What would you like to see happening?
Thanks, Katerina. Bias to me is a familiar, well-oiled weapon, definitely, as much as it is our shared common enemy. It's something that I find we're all guilty of. And as a product of our worldview and perspective, which informs our aspirations, values, and attitudes, bias to a degree is, yes, very much ingrained in our culture and relationships. But I certainly cannot testify to how any social standing has lended its powers to my current position, coming from a first-generation immigrant family and the first to do tertiary education in my family, a woman, and of course being in the younger demographic of this industry. It's only true that when you're empowered to do so and are equipped with the resources and adequate resources and aspiration, no one, and certainly my family and I, as well as many other women who are in the perfect position to have fallen victim to it, should be limited in their capacity for contribution to society. But as Fiona has so eloquently said, progress is apparent, and as a testimony to the growing awareness of its implications that we see now, International Women's Day and this event today allows us to actually shed light on what it might mean to be challenging these biases and that have leaked and tainted professional lives. So as a relatively speaking, very young professional in this industry, I'm incredibly indebted to the women who have demonstrated and vanguarded for me what that challenge and affluence of breaking biases and prejudices has meant, and where I can delight in that fruit that's been invested in for decades prior. And so in the experience that I've had in the workplace, courage is a recurring theme in the professional development narrative that bleeds into the personal. Women in leadership, women in education actively involve themselves where opportunity allows. And I've had the luxury of speaking in retrospect, but we see the progression of a once elitist approach to design actually transitioning from the design that benefits one at the expense of many to a model that is holistically environmental, inviting many to design for the needs of many, and as we should.
That's fantastic. Selena, you're the first that you've actually spoken about then that bias actually working its way into architecture and manifesting itself in design and built form, which again is a whole other webinar for discussion. So we are trying to talk about architecture. We're trying to talk about architecture, but we are having these conversations about equity and bias and all of these things, spending so much energy having these conversations when we're, oh, that's right, we're actually architects. You know, how much energy is going into fighting other battles when we could be focusing on design and spatial equity and all of that kind of thing. It'd be nice. The fact that this is it's noteworthy is still annoying, like Fiona said, that it'll be nice. The fact that there needs to exist a committee or a forum for these conversations kind of is very telling in itself. Georgia, I wanted to hear from you now. You would talk about your unconscious biases, and you also have some comments to make about courage and going out on a limb and people championing each other.
Yeah. Again, just thanks for the invitation to sit on this panel amongst these incredible women today. It's a real privilege. And I think just commenting on what Janine and Selena and Fiona mentioned before, and Tamara, how we've got biases of sort of perception, and really even on the International Women's Day website, they've got this quote that I found quite, it helped me think about what I might talk about today, which was, we're all individually, we're all responsible for our own thoughts and actions all day, every day. And a bias, yes, it is sort of ingrained in us, and it's up to us, I guess, to sort of challenge our own bias. And I think particularly in what I'm doing now in media is making sure and checking myself and making sure that there is diversity included in everything that we're producing through our publications and print and anything. And that can be really valuable to the profession and also design. And so I think it's really, you know, an unconscious bias is you're not really sure what it is. And so I think if I'm feeling funny about something, I go and seek others' opinions, and I listen to others' opinions to see if, you know, if it's a situation where I've had a confrontation with someone and I'm going, did they just say that to me? And is that what I'm seeing, or is that my bias, or is that them being inappropriate or something? And I think to lean on people who are you know, guide you and are happy to tell you when you're right and when you're not, when you're wrong or seeing something different. I think it's valuable to hear others' opinions. And in that sense, discovering your own unconscious bias in that way, so checking in with others. And that's something I try and practice every day. And similarly to what Shanine was saying, it's different in all different situations, whether it's culturally or practicing, or sort of depends on who you're talking to and what their experiences have been. And so I think the action of sort of breaking your own bias and hopefully helping others to sort of break their own opinion and change their ideas on what a situation is by having these conversations and talking to them, and also seeking what others' opinions are on a certain situation. And for me, and personally, through experiences of bias, it has looked like, and for example, there was a situation where I was really keen to progress in a project and really get my hands in and sunken in, and I could see other guys at the studio kind of really getting into it. And for me, I kept banging my head against the wall, like, why haven't I progressed the same way as them? And that's kind of what that looked like to me. Perhaps it was feeling uncomfortable, or I don't know what it was. But I then sort of in an action way went and, you know, thought what other people are up to, what my girlfriends were up to in their offices. And through that, I was then able to find people and talk to people, where I went on to my next position at another studio, and have ended up here because I've found these champions who have been willing to sort of guide me, but also challenge me at the same time. So, you know, learning from them, but then also having that ability to really go out on a limb and have the courage to sort of push myself. And if I am feeling uncomfortable about a situation, these champions who I've found have helped me through that. And they're the people that I continue to kind of check my unconscious biases against too.
That's fantastic. I like the illumination that you've got champions and beacons to shed light where there is darkness. Leah, we wanted to hear from you and some of your comments about the sort of existing framework that we try and morph ourselves into, and the sort of notion of opportunity and privilege.
Thanks, Katerina, and congratulations, Fiona, very well deserved. I give you a virtual hug. Would have been nicer if we were all together, but yeah, look, I guess as we sort of talk about what bias is to us individually, it's so wonderful to hear everyone's take on it, and it's been this sort of discussion about, you know, the recognition of it and the courage to challenge it, as some of them have mentioned. I just think fundamentally we do live in a world that is constructed based on men. Even when people mention the human condition, they are basically referring to men. So whether it is from micro design elements of how PPE, I watched how that didn't fit a lot of my friends. It doesn't matter whether, you know, crash test dummies are still not tested for females, and we're still, you know, we're constantly sort of having to come up against this, even though we are 50%, if not 50.23% of the population, that things are just not made for us. And I think that's a gap in data, that's a gap in perception, that's a gap in really just acknowledging and accepting that that is not acceptable. So if we're starting on a more complex base, or a base that's not for us, how do we sort of support each other to come about that? And looking at my colleagues, and as Georgia said, looking at support from each other where we often do, it's harder. Sometimes women, I think you feel like you're on a bit of a rat wheel, that you are running at a lot faster pace than people around you, yet they're proceeding further, or just their innate privilege is allowing their journey to be a little smoother. So when you want, you know, I mentor a lot of females as well, and you want to tell them that it should be easier by now. As Fiona, you know, rightly mentioned, are we still having these discussions? And whilst a lot of things are better, there are a lot of things that are not. And if you move into more segmented sort of facets of the industry, as I've moved into politics, there becomes a whole nother realm of expectation. If you're not male, if you're not from privilege, if you're not from, like, even your age, it's very odd that people will assume. I have had assumptions that, you know, surely I couldn't be, I must be the support officer. These perceptions that, as Tamron mentioned, this is nature versus nurture. This is not nature. These were not born into people's place. It's their own lived experience have formed these views in their head, where we have to keep breaking them. And I guess, I don't know, like, it's not a downer, but I guess I get a little bit angry that women have to constantly be breaking this bias. Like, it's pretty clear now, as the discussions have been had, and that, you know, that's the theme for us. But I think it's keep making noise is the actual overarching theme for the Women's Queensland Week. It's about that. We've kept saying it. Now we need much more people to come on board and start actioning items and making commitment to it. So, yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Leah. So this is our word cloud. What does bias mean to you? Wow, ignorance. That's pretty nice. Not ignorance itself, but sorry, I'm just absorbing this for a moment. Assumptions. This also provides a great deal of data that can be used. And at the end of the other thing I forgot to tell the listeners is that at the end of this, there will be a bit of a Q&A segment. So before, I think we finish up at 1, so, or 2 o'clock in the rest of the country. So before 1, if you could feed your questions. How does that happen, Anna? Is there in the Q&A bit or in the chat?
Yeah, so there's a Q&A function at the bottom of everyone's screen, and please add your questions in there. If you have questions to the panelist, we'll also collect any questions that the panel isn't able to answer if we get lots, and hopefully we can come back with some sort of consolidated response to those after the fact. But yeah, same as all the other Zoom webinars that I'm sure everyone's been in by now, there's a Q&A function at the bottom.
Okay, thanks, Anna. Now for the next part, we have another slide for the next question, which is what can be done about it? So there's already some answers. Isn't there a QR code there it is? People can scan and start sending us your responses, which will be collated. So we'll go back to our illustrious, amazing panel and ask the question, what can be done about it? Tamron.
Thanks, Katerina. So yeah, what can be done about it? It's an ongoing journey for me on how to address biases as I've dealt with them. Back when I started and before my life as an architect, I was working as an animator in video games and film and television. So that's definitely a male-dominated field, one of about 2 women in a 300 male production firm. So it was pretty nasty. And a lot of the time initially with the biases and harassments and all that, I was just in shock, distress. I was thinking, what is it wrong with me? And being young, I wasn't quite comfortable with confrontation at that stage. but it's something we all kind of need to get comfortable with, is just calling out when something makes us uncomfortable, and inevitably you ended up making the offender usually pretty uncomfortable, which is kind of satisfying along the way. So through experience, shock does not end. I am still amazed with some of the things people can come out with this day and age, but it's there. I try and control the rage that kind of associates with occasionally. And I really look at now sort of taking action, trying to educate people and seek a bit of accountability. So often just sort of saying, hey, those comments are incorrect, they're disrespectful, it's offensive to me or to other people, because quite often I'm in a room when I see biases going to others and sort of trying to say, hang on, is that really cool to do that? Like, we've moved on a bit from there. And sort of getting that conversation going. And a lot of people actually, which is probably a good thing, say, oh my God, I'm sorry, that was not the intent. And you can see this is where it's coming from, those learned childhood biases or just ignorance. And they're like, really sorry, call me out again if anything ever happens like that. Want to be positive. So you end up starting to develop allies along the way. You will get the gaslighters. They're sort of inevitable anywhere. So I just usually go on a rinse and repeat scenario. And often other people in the room will join you and they'll slowly get bullied down that way into realizing it's not appropriate. I have done situations where it's been one-on-one. I try and avoid those because I've had some pretty nasty instances coming out of that. If you don't have other witnesses or other people in the room that you can raise this as a conversation, consider even just bringing in a third party as a discussion point. And it's a way as well to sort of, as Georgia says, talk with people. Am I overanalyzing it? Did I misconstrue what's said? How would you take this action? Because it's left me uncomfortable. And I find sort of on 10 instances, 8 out of 10, you will sort them out. Everyone will be happy and you'll move on and get positive and everyone grows from it. You've got a couple that you'll have to just go through the process a couple of times, and you may have that one person that nothing's going to save them, really. And that one person that I've had in my experience, it wasn't gender-based. Like, some of their sort of biases towards me were very gender-based, appearance, age, title, but they were taking down all the men in the room as well. So even though everyone sort of ganged up, this was this person's personality, they were a bulldozer. They were too far gone to ever learn otherwise, but there was a great roaring cheer when they eventually were moved on from everyone and we were going through. So yeah, just get comfortable with making others uncomfortable by calling things out. Talk to people around you, get those sort of sanity checks, and yeah, unless you start to take some action, you're not going to really see any change, because people more often than not might not know they've even offended you. Particularly when it becomes cultural or some sort of those more finer nuanced things that aren't just black and white, like women get back to the kitchen sort of thing. Like, there's a lot of very fine ones that I'm still learning about, and yeah.
Calling it out. That's fantastic. And also, I think there's a point where you know, you have to recognize that some people are beyond salvation and it's actually not about you. It's their own ignorance. And, you know, ignorance, was ignorance the big central word in the word cloud? Janine, so can you talk to us about some of the ways that you've dealt with? Now, I know Belinda was going to be talking today, so I'm going to ask you to talk about one of her comments, which she talked about the upside down entity. Am I just throwing you into something and now you have to try and read her mind?
You are, but I was going to say, I think I was just smiling to myself. Tamron, that was fantastic, by the way. Thank you for all of those descriptors. And Fiona, I apologise for not congratulating you when I first spoke. I'm very, very pleased that that recognition is with you, because you do amazing stuff. Thank you. So Belinda and I met in 2011 volunteering for Emergency Architects Australia, right? And frankly, you know, having graduated in the early 90s from university, and or had been starting in practice at that time, bias was rife. It's everywhere on a gender basis. There wasn't a practice that, or a workplace in which I worked, and I'm sure Belinda feels the same, where gender bias was ingrained in every decision, every task that you were given, you know, and in the containment of your opportunity. And I think for both of us, I mean, we had different pathways, but we just got really sick of it. And the way for us that we have been breaking the bias is through the creation of our own space to practice in, through the creation of POD. And so I'm not sure, sorry, Katerina, because I can't speak to the upside down because I have the notes in front of me, but we didn't get quite to that level of detail in the conversation. But
it was the thing about you creating your own environment.
Yeah. And look, I'm lucky I come from a family where there is a bunch of fearless women in it who make a lot of noise and cause a bit of trouble, you know, in the scheme of perceived trouble, who basically speak up. But that was what we felt we had to do and wanted to do to be able to practice in a way that, you know, that we wanted to practice as women. Not that it's wildly different. We still make buildings, we still develop design briefs, we still do all the stuff that, you know, gentlemen in our practice in our industry do. But we have built what we think is an inclusive, flexible, collaborative office, you know, where there's a lot of communication and there's a lot of discussion about, you know, people's lives and how they want to do the work, and about design and how we undergo the work that we do. But no one's free of bias. So even with our own office, we're constantly going, oh, do we interpret that the wrong way? Are we going about this the right way? Is there some way we need to do this a bit differently? What I wanted to also say is that there's a lot of, I've got to word this carefully. I think I can say for myself in my life, I made choices for myself at different times which released me from biases, in the sense of being able to create a path for myself. So I made choices on a personal level that I felt wouldn't make my biases worse, if that makes sense. Now that can be interpreted as the wrong way around, saying don't do anything that makes it worse. And that's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is I specifically made choices on a range of incremental and important stages in my life about things where I could be in charge of what I was doing, so I wouldn't have to deal with all the rubbish that goes on. So, and I, you know, and certainly in the creation of POD together with Belinda, you've got this incredible scenario where you've got two very strong, outspoken women, which, you know, it's all, you know, which is great because there is a lot of robust discussion about how to make decisions, how to run the practice strategically, how to support other women around us, how to advocate for changes in the industry. So the other part of that, though, is the ability to speak up and be fearless must be balanced with an ability to listen. Because if you can't listen, then you can't learn, and you can't bring other people with you, and you can't lever and change existing conditions. So, I mean, the other thing is valuing yourself and backing yourself, and using your friends and your colleagues and your champions or your mentors to do that with you. To have a team on your side, because you can't do it by yourself, you know. And then through the gaining of confidence, the role modelling for others to show that you can do it. And as Fiona said, and Jane Hannon, who's in Cairns, who's been practising since the 70s, she works for Clark and Prince. I remember about 10 years ago asking her what the key to her, you know, success in her career was. And she said, stickability, just turning up every day and keep on doing it, and don't let anyone tell you that you can't do it or that you've got to change jobs because you're not supposed to be doing it. And I thought that advice is sound and correct. A lot of this is about perseverance and tenacity, and consistency in your integrity and your authenticity, I guess. What else I'm looking at Belinda's notes now while I'm talking to you. We're talking about breaking the bias. I think one of the things that Leah touched on, but that we haven't really talked about much, is that the ability to have a good hard look at yourself is a bit of a privilege, frankly. And it's hard for lots of people to break biases when they don't have the right circumstances or, environment or capacity to do that. And so there has to be a kind of understanding that we're able to have this conversation because we're innately privileged,
Yeah. That's a very good point. I wanted to pick up on your topic, your point of stickability, and to ask the Queen of Stickability here, Fiona. She has further comments, and what would you like to see?
Well, it was thanks, Shanine. It's really great to hear about what you and Belinda are doing with your practice, and it's a real role model and example for other people. And I hope next time we come on one of these is 10 of you talking. In thinking about this, I thought this is an Institute of Architects event, right? So what can the Institute of Architects do? And I commented previously that Paula was the only president we've had in Queensland. Now, obviously, we've done a lot better at national level. There's been more women presidents, but, it would be good to see more women presidents of the Institute. And one of the things that I think, and this not only holds back women, it holds back a whole variety of people who would be well placed to be a president, is the commitment of time precludes a lot of people, because it's you have to give up your personal life and you ruin your practice. So unless you've got a lot of support, you can't actually go for those positions. And so there needs to be some kind of financial honorarium or something to assist a larger variety of people to take those leadership roles. And maybe we need to make sure we're getting more balance on the committees, and even thinking about the membership categories and how people are members, because I know a lot of women have to drop out because it comes down to, can I pay for the institute fees or can I pay my professional insurance and things like that. So I think and I know a lot of these things are sort of nascent, and there's been various discussions throughout the institute on some of these topics. So I'd be saying, institute, pick up your game. And I'm conscious of the time, Katerina, so I won't say much more.
Institute, pick up your game. I don't know how much more you can say. Georgia, would you like to comment on what we can do about it?
Well, I've just been soaking in, listening to what everybody's been saying, agreeing. I just wanted to do a fist pump. But I think what we can do about it is, there was something about the stickability and talking about confrontation. And I think we'd be foolish to think that confrontation wouldn't happen across anybody's year, let alone a career in architecture. So I think, yes, becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable. I certainly hate confrontation, but I've done it. Everybody does it. And I think it's the only way to be clear about what has upset you and the action you would like taken forward. But also I think there's a level of, just thinking about what some experience that I've been through, sometimes it's okay to recognize when you're not getting any further, and perhaps then it's okay to, you know, lean again on your champions or listen to another person's opinion, but create a plan for yourself to know how you're going to achieve wherever you want to be, and really think about who's going to help you get there. And not use you or exploit you, but really get you there and help you to get to the level that you want to be, whether that is principal of a firm or I don't know what your dreams are. But I think it's okay to go and stop banging your head against a wall or somebody else's bias, because then you can go out and do what you need to do, and that be recognized, and then that also influence change in another way. So I think there's that pathway, and there's also confrontation. And as I mentioned earlier, I really do think finding your champion really helps you mentally, but also career-wise through work and through life. So yeah, and I like that comment earlier that Fiona had at the start, where it's just keep going. And just keep going. If you love it and you're happy, I think seriously, you will find a way to do it, and you will find people to help you do that.
That's awesome, Georgia. So, Selena, you ready to keep going for the next
I'd love to jump
65
on that.
years?
Thank you all for your insightful and concrete ways that we can be tackling bias. As a student, I'm, again, incredibly grateful for the opportunities that my networks have offered me through Sonar, through Beginner Masters where I'm working, and my own design group, Ignis, and for the skills I've been able to build on through them, both superior to me and within my bracket. It testifies, to the ever-developing nature of tertiary education in connecting students to practice, but also practice's understanding of student potential. And this in itself has been a social transformation occurring in the education space as well as the professional. And it's a dynamic trust of the experienced and the eager. And so when other people, when you do experience bias, what can you do when you're faced with it? I think it's important to remember that other people do have their own perspectives and their own worldviews. And the only thing that you can control completely, ultimately, is your own attitude. So it's being clear on your capacity and ability, whilst communicating also your intent and values, and particularly when they are challenged. And so setting the benchmark and then delivering to that expectation. And so also it's important to remember that you're not alone in this. There are support networks, there are other women, role models, and people who, like Georgia said, will champion you. And so students in particular, you're in such a unique time in your life where you can be overcommitting your time, procrastinating absolutely everything, and then doing anything in between. Breaking the bias from the lens of a student means recognizing a capacity for growth. And if that can be acknowledged for the individual, for the firm, and then for society as a whole, it means that we still have hope. Our children's children won't have to suffer the same prejudices as I did, as I benefited from my predecessors' courage. And breaking and challenging those biases takes a duality of humility, which I think we have touched on. It's admitting and accepting your own faults, but also an empowered spirit to explore, experiment, and evolve from traditional roles. We have those who have come before us, sharing with us their experience, and then we can now pave a legacy for those after us. We're in fact in a very quintessential era where I think the force of change is at its greatest agency. And so I see it as very exciting.
Selena, thank you for that eloquent speech. That was beautiful. I'm glad this is being recorded. Leah, so tell us about your voice and having a voice.
That was great.
And how you keep doing it.
I love the idea of a stickiness sort of and a tenacity, because I think we all have that. It's that perseverance to just get up each morning and do what we love. And I think if you're driven by passion and a commitment to do good, I think that's a really strong driver. As we were talking before about the framework that sort of is a bit more complex potentially for women to work in, I think COVID did strip that back a little bit. I think the idea that we were all quite vulnerable, we saw behind the scenes about how people were juggling life and balancing whatever it was their other commitments. And we sort of saw, as we are now, into, you know, sometimes into people's homes and, you know, the randomness of pets and what have you. And it was kind of nice to see this transparency about the people that we work with and seeing another side of them. And then I think where people are talking about that humility to understand that everyone has different lived experiences, but we're all coming to, hopefully, to get good outcomes. And at the heart of it, there's that understanding which can allow you to then discuss and work through a lot of biases or a lot of prejudices, as long as I think they come from an unintentional background. When they're intentional, as we've discussed, they are there to be hurtful and weaponized, and that's a horrific problem. And as Tamarin said, that takes, you know, it's courage to confront. You know, techniques I've learnt, and in me, you know, sometimes just stop talking and pause. And if you can raise one eyebrow while you're looking at them, that tends to speak volumes about, like, yes, you have said something that's so stupid, I'm not even going to warrant it with a response. That can be nice, and it sort of allows that anger to sort of just fizzle down a little bit before you respond. So the little things like that. But I've in meetings persistently where women are over talked, where often a man will mention the same thing that a woman had mentioned earlier. And so I think if women, especially if you're a little bit more advanced in your career, you sort of stop the conversation and just acknowledge, I'm like, was that just not what someone else had said? I'd like to go back and address that, because it's just persistent. I thought for a while maybe it was a sort of a decibel tone that we spoke in, but I'm thinking not. I don't think there's any science on that. But so I think with the complex problems that we're coming up with, as we've seen with climate change, you know, we've really got, through the built environment, some enormous issues to deal with. And I think women are so well placed in their collaboration and empathy, the way they deal with leadership to front these problems. I think we've had a long progressive history of a very patriarchal way of dealing with things. And I think now it's more about equity and respect for a different balance, but most certainly to get women up in leadership roles. And that, I mean, the government architects 3 years ago, out of all 7, there was 1, Jill Gardner in Victoria. As of this year, all 7 are female. So you just think, and that's, you know, the heart of policy and actually getting a driving change. It does take perseverance. It does take, you know, you get used to being ignored and having to, like an ever ready bunny, just keep going. But we all do that. And I think the support network that I found is just spectacular. And it can be social, it can be your family, it can be, you know, your work colleagues. Just keep talking to women. And as Georgia said, just throw things out, because sometimes when you're in the fishbowl, you can't actually see that what's happening is not okay. And you spend a lot of energy, as we've discussed, as Shanine discussed, just sort of burning that energy trying to deal with this, when really you're better to jump out into another environment, because there is so much, you know, only so much energy you can invest in. Preferably take all the good people with you while you're going, you know, if it's that bad, and rescue everyone. So yeah, look, I guess that's the sort of thing I would recommend. I do, you know, absolutely just think, have a lot of great women around you, but do kind of listen out for those inherent biases when someone else is dealing with them as well. If you can sort of, you know, throw them a lifeline or just a helping hand, I think it means the world. And honestly, me in my role, of course, I've had massive, you know, should I be here? Imposter syndrome. I kept thinking for the first 3 weeks, someone might tap me on the shoulder and go, just joking. And that would be awkward, because I'd already set up my stuff in my desk and everything. I thought, you know, but then you have people that come and say, no, like, we honestly, it's surprising that people don't want you to fail. A lot of it is in our own heads. So as long as we sort of can combat and lift each other up together, I think we can do really great things. And I'm very excited over the next 10 years about, you know, look at the different generations that we see. But we do need some action. And I agree with Fiona. I think quotas. So I would throw out to the Institute, I think the presidency should have the option for co-chairs where 2 women could apply together to split the load. I think they should have a base pay, because things like childcare aren't covered under, like, you can't claim it on tax, but you can claim having beers at the bloody pub afterwards. So, you know, things like that, not that everyone has children, but there's sort of things like that, that why not? Let's just start breaking up the framework to actually suit what might actually get the right people in the roles. Because God forbid we can see it, you know, further in politics. Like, it's not set up for the best people to be in those roles. Obviously, the best people are not applying for the roles, because it fundamentally, they can't see themselves in it, or they just can't even see how they would manage it, even if they did get into it. So yeah, I think it's about us all throwing that out there and changing. I'd love every firm, you know, we've been looking at that with trades through public works, is putting very specific quotas. Some people have issues with quotas. I think if you don't have a target and a time frame, it will never happen. Do it, get there, they will fall away, because having women in these roles will then seem just so normal. As Selena said, I hope our children then don't even, they'll be like, how dumb is that? You had to actually say you had to have 50% women. How silly. Why would you need to do that? I hope that's the conversation in the future. I think that would be wonderful. We can talk about the really problem solving, really big issues.
Wow, Leah, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. We've only got 5 minutes left. What can be done about it? Education and confrontation. Love this confrontation. And the being comfortable with being uncomfortable and making other people uncomfortable. It's fantastic. Let's go make people squirm. Anna or Naima, do we have time for a question, 2 questions? Have you been fielding questions from our audience? Is someone going to respond?
Hi, Katerina. We have had a comment from Lisa Neal, and she was agreeing to George's point, and she said that maybe there could be something that the Institute can do to help people create a career plan, maybe an individual one that could support women particularly. So that's a great idea. Thank you so much, Lisa, for sharing that one. And then there is, again, another point that Lisa has shared, and she says that good point about being spoken over Leah. So that's for Leah. Great ideas, represented by Annabelle Crabb. One, Polly talked about backing each other's ideas and reinforcing who they came from when you are in a meeting where blokes elevate the idea and claim their own. So these are the 2 comments, I guess.
I'm sure we've all experienced that. I think well, thank you, panelists. Congratulations again, Fiona, on your amazing achievement and well-deserved recognition. And well, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, and thank you, the panel, for giving, again, so generously of your time. It's not just this, but, you know, I hope everyone knows that there was a lot of time and effort and energy and thought that went into getting ready for just a chat. And I wish we could sit around with a glass of wine and, you know, someone's lounge and do this. But this has been fantastic. And I think we started the discussions talking about some of the themes that had come out of our previous discussions, which were about recognition, courage, and championing. My sort of summary out of the things that everyone has said today is this beautiful balance between confidence and humility. That, you know, you need the confidence to say something, but also the humility to pick yourself up and know that you're wrong, and know that acknowledge that you don't know stuff. So all of you display that in bucket loads, and that's why we asked you to be part of this panel today. So thank you, everyone, and we'll hopefully everyone's leaving with some positive thoughts and call to action, and may the conversation continue. I think we're just on time.